Hello and welcome to this video in which we are going to analyze some of the movements of David Russell's guitar technique. You know, some people are amazing performers, some people are amazing teachers, and then occasionally there are people who are amazing at both. This is something I have a good feel for because my main guitar teacher was also this way. His name is Robert Guthrie, an amazing artist and also an amazing teacher, somebody that really cares about the person that's sitting in front of him and how he can help them. And David Russell is definitely this same way. I am fortunate enough to have played for him in a masterclass, and he gave me an amazing lesson. And in my research for this video, I listened to a lot of performances, studied a lot of video footage, and if you just search him on YouTube, amongst a ton of performances, you will also find a ton of videos where he is teaching. He's giving somebody a master class, or he's talking to a group, or he's doing some kind of workshop. David Russell to me is kind of a technical wolf in sheep's clothing. And I mean that as the highest form of compliment. And what I mean is that his interpretations are always beautiful. His sound is so rich and lush, and he just makes everything sound like it's very simply executed. So you might think, yeah, he just follows all the rules and he just knows how to play very simply. But when you really analyze what his hands are doing, he's an absolute technical monster. I mean, this is a guy that is playing the heck out of the guitar, and it just so happens to be in maybe the prettiest package that you'll ever hear when it comes to his sound production. So we're gonna see a lot of that. So the first thing I want to look at here is how David Russell's plucking hand thumb functions. And it's really interesting. So he has one of these thumbs where he will oftentimes utilize a lot of tip joint in his free stroke. So you can see here his thumb just kind of is, it's kind of bending at the tip joint, it hangs above the string, and as he makes the stroke, he just flexes that tip joint. But this is something that you don't usually see. Every once in a while, you'll see someone who has a thumb that works this way, and it just seems to be very natural for them. Statistically, most guitarists seem to play with a more straight thumb, where the tip joint, you can't visually see it move. Even if it's kind of used for some fine control, maybe, it's not used to the point where you can see it flex. Usually the movement is going to come from other joints in the thumb. But, this is something that David Russell uses a lot. He flexes this tip joint to play the bass strings, but he doesn't always do this type of stroke. In fact, he commonly alternates between a heavily flexed tip joint stroke and more of a straight thumb approach, which this is really interesting to me. So here's a clip of him playing tremolo, and there's a good example of this. You can see when he goes down to the 6th string, he will use more of a flexed tip joint type of stroke. And sometimes on the 5th string too. Looks like he also utilizes that tip joint a lot. As he goes more up the strings, the thumb gets closer to the fingers, and his thumb is more straight. It looks like here, as he's going to play a free stroke with the thumb on the 3rd string, the thumb turns into the completely kind of long straight thumb that you more typically see. So I think this is pretty amazing. I would assume that this is an unconscious kind of switch. But really interesting to me how this is utilized and how different the strokes look, even from just string to string. And one last thing about the tip joint of his plucking hand thumb, because this does look like a very natural move for him. Here he's playing a free stroke scale passage, and I'm very interested in what people do with their plucking hand thumbs when they're not using them. So when you're playing a scale or something like that, people do all kinds of different things with their thumb. And you can see that his thumb is just kind of hanging down by the fingers, not on a string or anything, and it's in that almost flexed tip joint state. I'm not sure if he's actually feeling a flex there or if it's just the natural state of his thumb. But just in case, if you have trouble figuring out if you're a tip joint thumb person or not, just look how natural it is for his thumb to be that way. So when it's just kind of hanging there, you see some bend in that joint. So this next group of shots are all of David Russell's fretboard hand. And the theme here is, look at this amazingly disciplined, powerful, and accurate hand. And, his movements are so smooth that I think the power can really kind of get by you. But we're going to point out a couple things that just show the tenacity of his fingerboard hand. I think that's an accurate word. It doesn't mean it's not in a very graceful, very specific, and highly accurate package, but there is just a lot of power going on. He has very powerful hands, and he really seems to utilize his fretboard hand by not breaking a kind of standard set of rules. Each finger is very curled, and he always moves from the big joint, predominantly from the big joint, whether it's a lift or just a relaxation. That keeps the fingers as close to the strings as they can be, and it keeps them in optimal position to come down like hammers, wherever they need to. And it's really interesting to me, if you go back to some older videos, you will occasionally see him break one of these fingerboard hand rules. And I only point that out because I just think it's absolutely incredible that someone can, already have a well-established career, already be able to perform the way that they want and, not have anything get in their way, but still work certain movements completely out of their technique. So, if you go back to an older video, you may every once in a while see a finger shoot out that doesn't need to, but I could not find a single instance of this happening in any performance that David Russell has that's been done in the last, 20 or 30 years. It's just immaculate fretboard hand execution. And to me, it has to be something that he consciously said, I'm never going to do this move again. And he worked it out. So I think that's kind of a tiny insight about his goals and motivation. David Russell has very broad hands, they're very big, so you will see him utilize a lot of fingerings that involve reaching out with the fourth finger. However, you will never see his fourth finger completely flatten out. There's always at least, even if he's reaching way out there, there's always at least a slight bend in the joints. So he still maintains this integrity with the fretboard hand, even if he's stretching his fourth finger out there. This is just a little instance I've tried to isolate to show some of the power of his fretboard hand. And I would describe a move like this as a contained explosion. If you watch him play in real time, you just see grace and fluidity with the fretboard hand, maybe some examples of his powerful technique. But looking at moves like this, this is where he's playing a couperin piece. I think it's a rondo from his Tiny Desk concert. Also, this is linked below. But this piece requires just the left hand just going all over the place. A lot of shifts, a lot of difficult left hand technique. So sometimes there's no other way to get from one shape to another than to utilize the opening of the hand, and all the fingers just have to jump. So that's what he does here. But the amazing thing is, they only jump the absolute minimal required distance, even though I think you see some of the fingers opening up because you have no choice. There's not enough time. You need that speed, and so you have to open up your hand. But it only goes just as far as it needs to, and then they slam back down in the next chord shape. So if you watch this performance, you're going to see moves like this all over the place. So this is just a little example of his kind of deceptively explosive fretboard hand technique. So this is just, I think, a little peculiar thing, and it's not really specifically pertaining only to David Russell, but it's a concept that I have wondered about, and as I was studying footage for this video, I kind of found this concept at work, and I thought, well, I guess I'll go ahead and point it out here just for a second. So I have at times wondered about how much should the fingerboard move back and forth as you're playing. You know, does it move at all? Does it move a lot? Does it move a little? But here you can see as David Russell is playing, and this is footage from that same Couperin piece, so you see a lot of fast movements, complicated movements, and powerful movements with the fretboard hand. Basically, he's constantly lifting and slamming his hand down with, you know, strength and accuracy. And you can see each time his hand comes down, the fingerboard moves. And then as he relaxes his hand off the board, it moves back where it was. I just think it's really interesting to see these tiny little movements and these tiny little details that people are able to account for when they play. Here, I just want to point out some things that are happening in the plucking hand, some different moves, and just some things that show discipline in the plucking hand as well. So here you see him utilizing the wrist, kind of like he dips in with the wrists. So this is an interesting move. You see him do it like in a chord or maybe an arpeggio from bottom to top, where just the wrist dips in, and maybe it helps out the fingers a little bit as you go up the strings. Here we have what I think is a really great example of discipline for the plucking hand, and I'm talking about a plucked chord technique. So this clip is him playing the Villalobos Stroto No. 1, very famous piece, and there's a lot of chords in this piece mixed in with arpeggios and little melodies. So you can see when he's playing a chord without even hearing the music, because he's using very disciplined, very consistent chord technique. And a lot of people swear by this technique where when you play a chord, you close the fingers together so there are no gaps, no spaces between the fingers, and it kind of helps you utilize all your fingers together as one mechanism. So you see him doing this here exclusively when he has a chord, and I just think it's really neat to watch the spaces between his fingers. So when he goes to do, you know, a couple notes of a melody or some little arpeggio, you see, you know, a little bit of space between the fingers. And then whenever he goes to do a chord, you see that space just close up completely and disappear, just seamlessly getting in and out of this chord technique. So the last thing that we're going to look at in this video is just David Russell's general free stroke hand position. I know that many guitarists play and they swear by preparation. You don't ever play a note unless your finger is touching the string first. So in a lot of this footage, I think what you see David Russell doing is smacking the strings. Have you ever been told not to smack a string in a lesson? I know I have, and rightfully so. But I say that because I can't think of another term for it. So let's look at this clip here. Okay, he's playing a Barrios tremolo piece that he plays a lot. And you can't see what the fingers are doing here, but you can see what the thumb is doing. And as we slow the footage down, you can clearly see him reaching back for the stroke with the thumb, and it kind of winding up above where the string is that he wants to hit, and then coming down and hitting the string. And you can see him swing because the thumb goes up and it goes above the string. Everything that's going on here works into his sound. So that leads me to believe that this distance that he's coming from is absolutely vital to his sound. And this makes me think he's actually even more accurate than you thought that he was. Because it's one thing to be pinpoint accurate and say, yeah, every time I go to play a note, my finger's prepared on the string. I think it's a whole different thing to be able to hit the strings. And when we're talking about guitar playing distances, even a few centimeters, maybe even a matter of millimeters, feels like a long way. It's a big change, and it's something that has to be accounted for. So I think it's absolutely amazing. In this footage here, I'm really trying to look at the A, M, and I fingers to see, are they preparing on the string or are they coming from a distance? And it's kind of hard for me to tell, really. But I think what I'm seeing is they are coming from a small distance. It looks like to me that when the finger starts its movement, you know, it's above the string. I think you can mainly tell it with the index finger, also with the middle finger. You can't really see the A finger, but it looks like he's utilizing that same type of stroke. Here is another small example of this technique at work, where he's kind of hitting the string from a little bit of a distance. In this clip, he's just trying out a guitar, so it's not really a performance. But what I was interested in this clip is he does a short appoggiando passage, a little rest stroke scale passage. And you can see that he also is hitting the strings from a bit further away. And I think you can see that because the fingers, especially the I finger, it goes out before it comes down. So it looks like he's doing the same thing here. He's actually smacking the string from this very calculated distance. Now, I looked at a lot of footage where it looks like, you know, David Russell is mainly utilizing this type of hand position. In other words, it almost looks like to me his hand position is less on the strings and more in a zone right above the strings. So then I looked at some of this other footage. So what do you see going on here? Well, I see a lot of planting. So here he's utilizing, you know, pretty different plucking hand technique. I think this is really cool to see someone that can play on the highest of levels, and it looks to me like David Russell just takes what he needs when he needs it. You know, whether he needs to plant, whether he needs to come at the strings from the air. But I think this is just a fantastic example of not being afraid to adhere to the rules and not being afraid to break the rules. So that's all that we're going to talk about here. Thanks very much for watching. I am a classical guitar player and teacher in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. If you'd like to contact me about lessons, I'll leave links all around for you to do that. If you want to come join my online guitar community, please do. It's called the A Guitar Community, and there's a number of instructional videos and courses for fingerstyle guitar located there, and I'm updating it all the time with more material. I'm also a composer for fingerstyle guitar, so I'll leave links around for my compositions if you'd like to check those out. Thanks again for watching, and have a wonderful day.